Hiya, I'm Ed.
Hi, I'm Huw, and welcome to Tone Twins TV and our magical mystery guitar.
The Golden Wonder itself.
The Golden Wonder, yeah. There's some debate about what this actually is. It's either...
It's a guitar.
It's definitely a guitar. It's definitely a Strat.
We know that much.
Yeah. It's either the best Tokai in the world or...
It could even be a genuine 50s Fender.
Yeah, 56/57. So the whole purpose of this video today is to try and figure out what exactly it is and hopefully go through some of the procedures that we would typically use to establish whether a guitar like this is actually a vintage guitar, and which parts are actually genuine and which parts are repros.
Because there's loads of little intricacies and little bits and bobs which can really help identify years of Strats and whether they are indeed genuine or sort of put together modern ones and
absolutely.
stuff, isn't
Of course, you know, in an ideal world, we'd have an original 56/57 to compare it with.
That'd be really useful.
It would be useful.
We left one around here anywhere?
Oh, here we go.
Oh,
and
that's
here
nice.
we have... You like that?
That's very nice.
Yeah, I like it too. This is the real deal. This is a 1956, late 56 Fender Stratocaster from our friends at Lucky Fret Music. It's not actually for sale. This actually belongs to one of the store's co-owners, Andrew Raymond, who's a really good friend of ours. And he's kindly let us borrow it and take it apart.
Be super useful to compare this with this.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what we need to do is kind of get really close in on some of the original parts. We'll kind of get into doing some measurements and hopefully figure out what on earth this thing is.
And we'll do some sound testing as well.
Absolutely. If it doesn't sound like this one, it's not like this one.
Yep. Better take out all the active electronics. And
yeah, and the EMGs.
Yeah.
Okay. Right, so let's decount to the workbench and see what we've got.
Let's go.
Crack in. Well, the first thing to consider really is the finish and whether or not it's nitrocellulose. It's not the original finish. But you can test whether a finish is actually nitrocellulose or not by using a cotton bud with a little bit of acetone. And if you wipe the finish in an out of the way area, maybe inside the pickup cavities, if the finish is nitro, it'll actually come off on the cotton bud and you can see it. I've tried wiping this finish on both the fingerboard and the body with acetone and nothing came off whatsoever. So my feeling is it must be some kind of poly finish. I don't know, maybe done in the 70s or 80s by the looks of things.
It looks quite old.
Yeah, it's checked in its own way. I mean, it looks kind of cool. The finish has grown on me, but
it's not a period correct gold though either, is it? We're hoping to ascertain if this is going to be a genuine 50s Fender. Well, certainly that finish isn't genuine 50s.
No, it certainly isn't. When they refinished the neck, what they did, if I bring this across here into camera, the neck has been refretted with jumbo frets, actually exactly the same as Andrew's. And when they decided to refinish the neck, and I presume they did this because, like most 50s Fenders that have been well played, there was a lot of marks and wear through of the finish on the fingerboard, so the fingerboard probably looked really mucky. And I'm thinking somebody shot the fingerboard in order to clean it up before the respray. Now the big giveaway for this, if you can get it close up on this, Ed, if you look at the top of the walnut plug, just behind the nut, you can actually see that the walnut is exposed in this area between the nut and the end of this curve as it comes up. So basically, it's extremely close. Even on Andrew's guitar, maybe a 32nd of an inch. So there wasn't a lot of maple to play with there. And by over sanding it, they basically exposed the top of the plug, which is one of the reasons why this neck feels slightly different to Andrew's, because it's lost a little bit of depth. And it's quite easy to feel, you know, a difference in depth of even half a millimeter, certainly a millimeter. It's a world of difference in the way a neck feels.
You notice it as slightly thinner, but overall it's in the same ballpark in terms of overall feel of a neck, definitely, isn't it?
Exactly. So They've resprayed the front of the neck, but to my absolute delight, they didn't respray the back of the neck. So this is actually worn through pretty much the wood. It's got a beautiful kind of feel to it. The wood is slightly oxidized. Under black light, the areas around here glow really, really nicely, like vintage lacquer would. But where the overspray has happened here and on the back of the headstock and the front of the headstock, there is actually no black lighting going on whatsoever.
You've got that beautiful V shape to the neck, haven't you?
Yeah, so this bit here.
It's worth pointing out there's some features around here which sort of distinguish it as a mid-50s Strat, don't they?
Yeah, let's grab Andrew's Strat quickly and we'll just have a quick look. So we got this hump on both these guitars. Just as this curve comes in through here, there's a little hump, and it's exactly the same on my guitar here. They feel absolutely identical. Okay, checking these tuners out. All of these tuners have what are called the single line clusons. So there's a single line with the, what's written on there? It is Cluson Deluxe, I think, written on there.
And it's worth noting it can be quite confusing because these tuners have obviously got loads of lines on them.
Yeah.
But the single line is the one line of the deluxe wording, isn't it? Or Cluson on some of them.
Yeah.
And then they went to having it in 2 lines on later ones and so on.
Yeah, around about 64, 65. This one is clearly different to all the others. There was a broken tuner on this guitar when I got it. Actually, it was the string post that was snapped. And I was on holiday in Los Angeles and in a music store over there and got talking to the owner, and he very kindly gave me this tuner to go home with and complete a set. You probably need to get it looking a little bit rustier, but it's kind of cool.
Totally period correct. You can see from
well,
the
actually, look, can you see these lubrication holes here?
Yeah.
All the same size on mine, all the same size on Andrew's, but slightly smaller on the one that was given to me.
Slightly later, perhaps.
Slightly later, maybe. And also the tuner shaft actually protrudes past the housing if you come around to the other side here. Okay, so what we've done is we've popped off the D-tuners, and we're looking for these holes here. So this is Andrew's guitar, this is my guitar. So what the reason this is here is it was actually a pinhole for a router template that was used in the factory when Fender was creating the outline of the headstock and the rest of the neck. Okay, so they just put the pinhole there, secured the template to the maple blank, and enabled them to route around it and create the shape. Having these tuners off, it gives us another opportunity actually, because what we can see here is that this, from my guitar, is a patent number Cluson. It's got a stamp on the back. And if you look at the tuner on Andrew's guitar, that's actually a patent applied for stamp on the back of that, patent applied. Okay, what that actually means is this set of tuners on Andrew's guitar is correct, and the set of tuners on my guitar were made slightly later, so having a patent number puts them in the 1958 to 1964 time frame. So they're vintage tuners, they're exactly the right tuners for a Fender guitar, but we can say that if this guitar is a 56/57, it didn't leave the factory with these tuners installed. Well, we should turn our attention to the bridges and the saddles. Obviously what we're looking for here is Fender Pat Pending stamps in the actual saddles, and all 6 of these have the correct stamps. They're obviously quite rusty as well. So they've been well used. The other thing that I notice is that the intonation screws have seen a lot of screwdriver action. So over the years, the heads have become slightly stripped, and a couple of them, I believe, have actually been sawn to allow them to be turned using a flathead screwdriver rather than a crosshead screwdriver. One thing I always look for is little tooling marks across the back of these saddles. They're not it's not particularly apparent on Andrew's saddles or mine because they're so worn, but you see it particularly on 60s Strat saddles. You have little straight marks, often with two bang in the center of the saddle, and the marks are remarkably consistent. So it's one thing I always look for when I'm trying to decide whether saddles are original or not. I'd say that probably the height adjustments, little grub screws in there, I'd say most of those have been changed. Maybe that's the only original one there. Probably because it's stuck.
They look very shiny compared to the other parts.
Yeah, they do on Andrews as well though.
Interestingly, the wear on the saddles, the low strings have gone dark on Andrews. These two.
Yeah. That's typically what you find because if your hand is, palm of your hand is resting there when you're playing, okay, these are the ones that end up getting more corroded than the others. I mean, it's similar on this one,
on yours,
but perhaps more kind of there's more sign of wear across the saddles, but the colour's exactly the same. And if these are fake saddles, they're absolutely the best fakes I've ever seen. Okay, so using the digital calipers on the spring cavity route, we get a reading of 4.892 inches. And if we just transfer this across, we have exactly the same measurement, which is lovely. Let's try it in the other direction. And we've got 2.25 inches. And it's exactly the same on Andrews. And if we take a last measurement across the opening for the string block, we've got 3.066, and in this one maybe 3.085, but I think that's pretty much within tolerance. One thing to note about the guitars from this specific time frame in the 50s is that the contouring of the bodies is really quite exaggerated compared to earlier and later Strats. For instance, the tummy tuck here extends all the way down onto the upper horn quite dramatically. You'll also notice how the strap button is kind of round the corner and pointing downwards towards the neck on these vintage Strats. Absolutely identical. Viewed from the side, the thickness of the body at the end of this tummy tuck is it's so fine you feel like you could cut yourself on it. It bears no resemblance to the 54s. And certainly not the later 60s and 70s ones, or even the rosewood ones in the immediate period before the CBS takeover. Very, very dramatic and sculptural approach to carving the body.
These rounded corners seem particularly really nicely defined and rounded as well.
Yeah. And if we flip this over and we look at this, I don't know if you can actually see it, it should be in shot there. This end part of the body is again very, very thin. Very, very thin. And as you come across the top of this, you can see the sharpness that I was talking about. If we just move this one out of shot and compare that to Andrew's. Again, have this very, very thin quality to the body, and it's exactly the same down here. One of the best things when I examined this guitar, most exciting things, was discovering that whoever did the refinish had the good grace and common sense to put some masking tape over the body date, and by bringing the spring claw back, we can actually see the original yellow staining of the wood and the nitrous cellulose on top with this wonderful October 56 body date. And even more exciting was when I borrowed Andrew's guitar the first time and discovered that it had exactly the same body date underneath the spring claw. If you look particularly at the way the 6 has been done, and also the colour and thickness of the pencil lines, it looks to me that it was, both dates were written by the same person. The other thing doing this shows us is that Andrew's guitar still has the original and correct spring claw screws, whereas at some point they've been changed on mine.
In what way are they different then?
We'll see that the thread goes all the way up to the head, and on Andrew's there's the smooth area between the head and the thread section. Okay, you're probably wondering why I've got this masking tape on the back of the guitar. The reason is that we discussed the router template Pinhole on the back of the headstock, and they use the same kind of arrangement for routing out the bodies. So you can, one thing to look for, and you can invariably see them through the finish, is the little plugs that Fender used to put into the body to plug the holes left from the router template. If they're usually quite hard to spot, but if you just kind of look across it when there's a good light source shining towards you, you can usually see these plug holes showing through the finish. Now, if these guitars were made together, then the distance between these plug holes should be absolutely identical. So if we measure across with a ruler, what we see is a distance of, yeah, just about exactly 13 7/8 of an inch. Okay, so if we do the same thing with my guitar, if I move that out of the way and hopefully bring this back into shot. Measure across.
Free relicking service.
Yeah. And that is 13 7/8. Okay, you can do this with all vintage Fenders, and you should always be looking for something along those lines. Okay, we can also measure these serial number plates, and out of interest, you'll notice that this one is actually, so you got it the right way up here, beautiful. Okay, it's one of these rare ones with a -20 500. That's a great serial number, isn't it?
Brilliant.
-20 500. Out of back of my mind, I think Blackie, Eric Clapton's Blackie, was -2003 something or other.
Something like that.
Could be wrong.
Now, there's no way to prove that serial plate came with the guitar, of course. But,
No, absolutely. But it would be right if it's a 57. Okay, we got 2.52 inches this way. And if we go across to Andrew's, we have got 2.52 that way. And measure across. 2.013 and 2.013.
I always find it remarkable how certain parts on vintage guitars wear differently. And that adds to the whole unbelievably cool nature to them in terms of these plates. Look like they could have come from the factory yesterday.
Yeah, well, Fender's chrome work was great. You see it on a lot of the Blackguard Telecasters, that the chrome just looks brand new. The replicas seem to expect them to look completely worn out. But, you know, as I understand it, they used automotive quality chrome, and, you know, it's withstood the test of time. One little interesting thing to note with vintage plates is that the sides are always slightly rough. And if you look at the vast majority of the repro neck plates, they tend to be smooth. The plastics look quite different on Andrew's guitar and mine. Fender changed the formulation of the plastics that they used for knobs and pickup covers during the 50s. And 57 was kind of the changeover when they... Did they go to a kind of a nylon? Was it a nylon thing they went to? The white stuff is commonly called Bakelite, but it isn't technically Bakelite apparently. But they went to this type of plastic formulation that tended to yellow up. So we have this kind of discrepancy here with these quite yellowed covers, which has a kind of softer, smoother feel, and these white ones which are kind of feel a little bit more harder and brittle. The knobs are interesting because, firstly, we've got the lovely 3-spoke one there. Don't know if we can pull that one of Andrew's up. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so we've got a 3-spoke there. Now these have gone yellow, but if I look on the underside, you can see that it's actually quite a bright white in the areas that haven't yellowed up. The switch tip, I don't know, it's got a little mark on the end, looks like a moulding mark. I'm not convinced that's 100% original, although the shape's about right and the colour's good. When this guitar arrived, my guitar, it had 2 original knobs and it had a Japanese volume control. I could tell it was Japanese because the font was slightly different. Didn't look that great, so I popped this one on. This is it's a 60s or 70s Strat knob. Just looked better than the Tokai one. It would be nice to match up the knobs at some point.
Interesting how that second one you pulled off, the moulding marks inside look much closer to Andrew's, with a defined ring.
Yeah, the ring is actually above the spoke, isn't it? Yeah.
Right in the top here, going round.
Look at the scratch marks as well on the pick guards.
So would you say the guard's original on yours? Because it doesn't seem to have faded, same as Andrew's.
No, I'm not convinced by the guard at all. If we try and get a thickness reading on this. That's 0.059 of an inch. And on this one it is 0.06 of an inch. So the thickness is about the same, and the other thing I notice is that the edge isn't neatly cut. It looks more like they were stamped out. If you look at the edge of Andrew's as it comes around here, it's quite a rough edge to it. The colour's pretty close, isn't it, between the 2 guards?
Remarkably close.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a bit more dirt on yours, perhaps, which goes with some of the other plastic parts, but if you look under the knobs, there's little, if any, colour fade, and the same...
Just measuring some screw spacings. 5 1/8. All the measurements line up perfectly on these. 2 3/8. Yeah, the spacings are all correct for the screws. I'm not 100% on this guard, but there's nothing to suggest that it isn't an original guard. It's anybody's guess. It's so many years down the line, we will never know. So we're having a look inside, and what have we got here?
It's one of those Russian Fenders.
It is a Russian Fender, yeah. It's obviously the switch has been changed, but I have an original switch to put in there, which will be fun. The volume control has been changed, but both these parts are original. And 3047 is the date code, so that's a 3047, 3047, and there's an O. 4. So 4th week of 1957. So that kind of works out, doesn't it?
It does.
4th week in 1957. So 2 original parts. Now, the pickups. When I look at them, I see a slightly different colour to the coil of the middle pickup than to the bridge pickup and the neck pickup. I think all 3 pickups are old, but I think this one has been rewound.
So the middle rewound, you think?
Middle rewound, and it doesn't sound as good as the other 2. And also this one has been extended, had the wires extended. So yeah, 3 old pickups. Not bad. This would be quite easy and enjoyable to restore at some point. If we look inside the body as well, you can see the little furry bits from the router where they did the worm route for the wires. And I've had a little scratch at the finish here because I noticed that there was a plug, and it looks like somebody has put in some mahogany here. And if you trace it around with my finger there, it's about this kind of size, which makes me think a switch was put in. But then again, I can't see any channel for the wire, so until I strip the body, I won't quite know what's going on there. So let's have a look at this wire channel here. We'll get a quick gauge on the width. Got 4.96, 4.89, 4.68, 4.78, so it varies as it goes down. 4.90, yeah, so that's pretty much the same. If we measure the width of this, we've got 1.363, and on the other side it's pretty much identical. 1.050. Yeah, it's pretty much identical, isn't it?
So if we put all these things together, the sort of dowel marks from the spraying, the size, the contours, the paint that's still visible, and the pencil dates, and all those things together, what's your conclusion?
I don't really have any doubts that this is an original body from the same era as this one. I can see that there's a couple of plug dowel holes either side of this route. Obviously a little bit of wood has been lost from there, but the measurements and the contours, everything is just too accurate. It's no doubt in my mind, really, this is an old Fender body.
This gold one's had a bit more action perhaps over the years, you know, different mods and different bits and bobs, but
exactly, yeah,
fundamentally it is a body from the same line as this one, almost certainly, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing we should mention, which you didn't mention earlier on, is that the plastics on my guitar all blacklight really nicely, and of course in exactly the same way as they do on Andrews. And one last check to make on the pickups. It's well known that the magnets on the 50s Strat pickups should be south up, and later on with the 60s Strats, Fender changed to north up magnets. So this is just a regular compass, and the pointer will always go towards north. So if I hold this to a south up pickup, it repels the compass. Let's try Andrews. Same thing. Okay, well, what happens if we try a 63 Strat? And it attracts the compass pointer. So these pickups are north up, these pickups are south, which suggests that these pickups are original, just as these are original to this guitar. Here we've got the pencil date on the end of the neck, and we're reading 3/5/7, so March 1957. Strikes me that the body and the neck may not have originally been a pair, because it would have meant the body was hanging around for quite some time in the Fender factory, and that doesn't seem very likely. But anyway, 3/5/7, and I'm just very relieved, given that the neck was resprayed, that the pencil date is still there. Checking Andrew's neck out, we've got what appears to be RK and a date of 1956. So I've taken the digital calipers to the dots on the neck, and all the dimensions are identical, and the gap between the two dots on the 12th fret, absolutely identical. Side dots are exactly the same. So yeah, this all looks good. Another way to test whether you've got an American neck rather than a Japanese repro is to see if the truss rod adjuster will actually go onto the thread of the truss rod. If you use a bona fide vintage adjustment. So this is the one from Andrew's guitar. Put that back in there. Put mine back in. The wrong screwdriver. But yeah, the threads are identical, so this is definitely an American made neck. Okay, well, we've taken it apart, we've had a really close look. What's the conclusion, Ed?
Well, I believe we sort of come to the conclusion that it's mostly an original vintage 50s Fender.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. What we can't say for sure is whether all the parts on this guitar, indeed the neck and the body itself themselves, actually left the Fender factory on the same day. It could be a Bitzer, which is fine.
Could be.
Some of the most famous and valuable Strats in the world are Bitzers. Clapton's Blackie, Gilmour's guitar that's just sold at auction now for a record price.
Exactly, and then the modular basis of which Fender guitars were built and constructed meant that, I mean, you may even have one direct from the factory with a neck from a slightly different batch from a different body and so on. Certainly over the years, perhaps players have put different bits, favourite pickups in or different, you know. So it's almost impossible to say with true authority whether guitars have got all the original parts on. You can have period correct parts, and that's certainly what seems to be the case with this one.
Yeah, so I mean, at the end of the day, this guitar was relatively affordable as a result of all the stuff that's been done to it. Somewhere down the line now, I've got to think in terms of restoring it and what I'm going to do. It's certainly going to take the gold finish off.
Really?
Yeah,
I do quite like it actually.
Yeah,
but
it's grown on me as well.
It's not. I mean, there was There were a few gold Strats made, perhaps, weren't there?
Yeah, but they tended to have gold
right
parts as well, didn't they?
And it's not perhaps the correct gold and so
Yeah.
on. So it's when you've got something of this heritage, we feel it's nice to get them to the best playing, but also the most authentic they can be, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, perhaps it would go back to being sunburst, because from having seen the neck date in the spring cavity, we can reasonably assume that this was sunburst originally. But I think in large part that will depend on how much damage has been done to the wood under the finish. I'm pretty convinced that there's some switches have been put here at some point, which is a very common mod back in the day, and there are some screw holes where there shouldn't be. So it may not be possible, in which case it's going to be a custom colour. So, if you've got any suggestions, what colour you'd like to see it, or whether you want it to be sunburst again, we'd love to hear from you.
My vote's for sunburst, but again, like you say, it's dependent on the wood underneath.
Yeah, mine too. This one actually features quite a bit in our very first video on the 5A3 Tweed Deluxe. So if you scoot to the end of that video, you'll be able to hear this guitar in action. But we want to do it in a little bit more detail, so we're going to do a part 2 of this, where we're going to be comparing both these guitars through various amplifiers. So check in for part 2, coming very shortly.
50s Guitar Shootout. Thank you very much, take care, and please subscribe.
It's the button down there.
See you soon for part 2 on the vintage Strats.
Okay, thanks for watching, bye.
Hwyl fawr.